I love to listen to birds. I remember getting a CD once. It was a training that I had to be able to identify various birds by their bird song. And so I went to the park after going through several hours of my training, and I heard a bird. I felt it was familiar, but which one was it? Was it warbler or in the thrush family? Well, luckily, I brought along a long range camera to try to track it down. And I did. I was able to identify it through the sound and then verify it with the camera. It was an eastern meadowlark. I had to discern one melody out of all the others in the park, and then identify from the samples I had heard, and then prove it by seeing. My question for you today is, how do we recognize when God sings to us? How do we know God's voice from all the busyness of life? How do we know what God would have us know, what God would have us do? So we don't need to be all caught up in the busyness of life, but to take time apart to know God more, to follow inner intuitive direction and guidance. We read in Romans chapter 12, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Now, the word conform comes from the Greek suskamatizo, which means to fashion oneself according to. So you don't want to fashion yourself according to the outside world, the outside expectations, but rather to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. When we fashion ourselves to the outside world, what we're doing is we're letting our fears rule us. We're letting our expectations run our lives. We're falling into that place of willfulness versus willingness, of judgment, of doubt. These things all get in our way. We feel stifled. We feel stuck or trapped or incomplete, frustrated, less than, depressed, all of these things because we are fashioning ourselves to the outside world. We are comparing ourselves to other people, to other situations. Do not be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The word transform comes from metamorpho, to change or transfigure. We are to renew the mind, but that means we need to see with new eyes, to listen with spiritual ears, to pause, to take some time. I want to share with you a story about listening. This was at the DC Metro station on a cold January morning. A young man played 6 Bach pieces for about an hour. During that time, about 2,000 people went through the station, most of them on their way to work. After about 3 minutes, a middle-aged man noticed there was a musician playing, and he slowed his pace. He stopped for a few seconds, then he hurried on to meet his schedule. After about 4 minutes, the violinist received his first dollar. A woman threw the money in the till and, without stopping, continued to walk. After 6 minutes, a young man leaned against the wall to listen to him. Then he looked at his watch and started to walk again. After 10 minutes, a 3-year-old boy stopped, but his mother tugged him along hurriedly. And the kid looked back at the violinist, but had to move on. The several other children repeated the same action, and every parent, without interruption, without exception, forced them to move on. 45 minutes. The musician continues to play. Only 6 people out of thousands stopped and stayed for a while. About 20 gave him money, but continued to walk on their normal pace. He collected a total of $32. After 1 hour, the musician finished playing and silence took over. No one noticed, no one applauded, and there was not any recognition. No one knew this, but the violinist was Joshua Bell, one of the best musicians in the world. He played one of the most intricate pieces ever written with a violin valued at $3.5 million, a 1713 Stradivarius. 2 days before, Joshua Bell sold out a theater in Boston. This was many years ago. And even then, the seats averaged $100. This is a real story. Joshua Bell played incognito in the metro station. And that was organized by the Washington Post as a part of a social experiment about perception, about taste, about people's priorities. The questions arose in a commonplace environment at an inappropriate hour. Do we still perceive beauty? Do we stop to appreciate it? Do we recognize talent in an unexpected context? One possible conclusion reached from this experiment could be, if we do not have a moment to stop and listen to one of the best musicians in the world, playing some of the finest music ever written, with one of the most beautiful instruments, how many other things are we missing? I like to think that we take seriously this idea of stopping to smell the roses, to see things all around us, to notice what we need to notice. We can't change what we don't notice, and we can't appreciate what we just pass by. That Bible scripture told us to renew our minds so we may discern the will of God. And that word in Greek is dokimazo. It means to prove or discern. And it comes from the idea of separating, to perceiving apart. It's about asking the right question. See, I believe people have their own answers if they are asked the right question. Many years ago, I had a woman who called me after taking a whole bottle of sleeping pills. Her goal was to kill herself. I received the call. I was working at a crisis intervention center at the time. And I heard her, and I asked her an obvious question. If you wanted to kill yourself, why did you call me? And she said, I just wanted somebody to know why I was doing what I was doing. I'd been in a terrible marriage. My husband had mistreated me, and then he left me. And I was here with my 2 young kids, and there was no way for me to be able to raise them. I had no money. I couldn't get a job because I could not afford childcare. I had no friends. The only relative I had was a sister with whom I was estranged. I was convinced that upon my death, she would take on my kids and treat them well. But I had nobody. I had nothing. I had lost all hope. I said, there are so many choices you have. There are all kinds of places to go, places to ask for help. This is what I do, is I help people find their answers. And she said, I've already checked all those out. There's nothing for me. And she started sounding groggy. She started sounding very sleepy. I didn't want to lose her. I thought for a moment, and I asked her this question. I said, when your kids walk into your bedroom tomorrow morning, they're going to be confused. Then they're going to be scared. And then they're going to be hurt. And this is a hurt that they're going to carry with them for the rest of their lives. Is that what you want? I didn't hear anything back. I thought she might have gone to sleep. But then she answered. And she said, I never really thought that part through. We got an ambulance to her. She was saved that day, that night. And she went on to live a meaningful life, finding her answers, raising her kids. Our job is to ask the right questions so that we can discern the right answers. Now, there's a book called Discerning God's Will Together by Charles Olson and Danny Morris from the Alban Institute. And there's a 7-step process for discernment. I'd like to share that with you. The first part is simply asking. We center in prayer and then allow a question to take shape. If you want to write these down, that'd be fine. We allow a question to take shape, beginning with the word what. We do not ask how, or when, or which one, or who, or why. The question is what. The intention to reveal what is mine to do. So center in prayer. Allow the question to come up. What is mine to do? Then we align. See, there are guiding principles and values that we have. What do you believe? Do you have a mission, a vision? What are your ideas around universal spiritual principles, around the beliefs that you have, the values that you hold dear? All your life, you've been developing those. They are not the same today as they might have been 20 years ago. Your life has changed. You see that you've been able to prove some of these spiritual principles in your life. You have beliefs that have rewarded you and blessed you. You have values that you have been able to develop over this time. So you want to align with those. First, ask, what is mine to do? And then align with those guiding principles. The third step is to release. You specify the impeding thoughts, assumptions, experiences, or fears, and even your agendas. What do you have to release to participate freely in God's unfolding, in being able to truly discern what is the will of God? What are some of the places where you notice, I've asked this before, where you have resistance or insistence? Notice those things, those assumptions that you have, those fears that you might have. Because when we're wanting to know what God would have for us, it might be kind of scary. We might be asked to step out in ways that are unfamiliar to us. If we are, that's not a bad thing. That's how we grow our soul. That's how we become more of who we came here to be. That's how you have become more of what you came here to be already. Think back. Think back on the times when you moved through your difficulties, when you had that financial challenge, when you had to work through that difficult relationship, when you faced a health challenge or a loss in your life. These things do happen, but we need to know that we don't have to hold on to an ongoing resentment or fear or an assumption that is a negative assumption about life. What is it to release, to understand more of God? And then we proclaim, we affirm the attributes of our divine potential. See, what God wants for you always is the highest and best. You hear me say this over and over again. The universe is conspiring to support you, even when it doesn't look like it. Maybe especially then. You want to affirm the attributes of your divine potential. What do you have to embrace to be conscious of God expressing in you, through you, even as you? You have a divine potential. So you have started by simply asking the question, what is mine to do? Aligning your guiding principles, letting go of that which is not serving you. Now you proclaim, you affirm the attributes of your divine potential, and then you focus. You are able to then focus on one clear question. One clear question. It's a deeper level of what is mine to do. And then you receive. You take the question into the silence. We read in the Bible over and over again, be still and know. Clearly articulate the responses received without giving any judgment or even details. We open to receive. We listen with spiritual ears. We trust. We believe. And then the last is the same as our last basic principle. We implement, we take action. What is it that you will do and when? See, when you ask the question to start with, you don't ask about when or who. It's only what. You're moving from the what to ask the question all the way into the action, the implementation of the answer that you have received. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. God, just like the birds, is singing to you. What would God have you do? What would God have you know? God is seeking to be expressed in and as you. It takes diligence. It takes faith. It takes willingness to choose not to be conformed to this world. We are bombarded with all kinds of reasons that we should align with whatever else is going on. To wear these clothes, drive this car. But we don't want to be conformed to the world, but transformed by the renewing of our minds. Why? So that you and I may discern what is the will of God, what is good, what is acceptable, what is perfect. Ask the right question. Listen deeply with patience, and you can and will discern the perfect answer. God bless you.